All right. Well, I am thrilled to be welcoming another guest to the channel. We have today Jonathan, the founder and CEO of Decentral, which does all sorts of Bitcoin mining stuff. I am particularly excited, as I was mentioning before this, to have you on because mining is a topic that I've covered some on, but not as much as I would want to. So really, really excited to have you on. Jonathan, welcome to the channel.
Thanks for having me, Jan. And thanks for having us as a partner with Joltz as well.
Absolutely. We could not be more excited. So to get into things as I often do, because it's always interesting, maybe first a little bit about yourself, share how you got into Bitcoin. What is sort of your genesis story for Bitcoin personally?
Yeah, so it really started really small and by our own means. So I think our story is a story that can inspire a lot of the mining plebs that are getting started out there. So in about 2016, I'd say we started to look into mining Bitcoin, and that was just when the new Antminer S9 from Bitmain released. So we got that first batch. We actually just got one unit, and back then you could buy just one unit from Bitmain. And we plugged it in our microwave socket in our 4.5 apartment. So and we learned the hard way it was making hell noise. We had to use a special power supply EVGA G2 because we had to run it on 110 volt. So this restriction quickly became obvious to us in North America. And so later on, we've evolved into making our own mining facility. It started really small, and we got a strike of luck because we managed to put our hands on a, modular type of units that were just neighbor to a distribution center of Hydro-Quebec. So we started with a room with 20 miners and then started to increase to 40 and 60 by getting some more of those modular units and expanding into them. So by I think 2017 we were getting some traction. There's Radio Canada, which is a big media here in Montreal, that came to our facility, visited, and this brought so much visibility we just couldn't handle it. Back then we were me and my partner, first business, not even a year in business, with our phones ringing, just no idea how to do anything with that. So, but it opened our eyes into the potential and into how, how when exposed, because this was one of the first exposure for Montrealers to Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. It showed us that there was a big potential there. So definitely we got more interested. We were still working, our main job at the same time back then. So we were doing this, on the during the night and during the weekends. And so we started to have demand from some of our friends and some outside people to host their machines. And so we started to look into the hosting model. And it seems obvious today, but back then there was like almost nobody showing off their mining facility, mining services. So it was really new and novel to us. And so we started to offer some first packages and learn, with the fluctuations, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, learn a bit more about, economies of scale, obviously. So at some point, we're small and we have to pay a certain rate for the electricity. So we're starting to ask those questions where, okay, you know what if we were using hosting to get more electricity, get it at a better rate? And even if we only use 10% of that mining for ourselves, at least the mining we do is going to be to a much better rate, right? And we're going to be able to offer that better rate to other people staying with us. So that was the goal. But by the time we get everything in place, there was the moratorium that got put in place by the previous liberal prime minister, not prime minister, but energy minister, Pierre Moreau. So that moratorium essentially froze all new application for electricity. So we were, I think, at about 200 kilowatts back then. So pretty big for people starting with just one Antminer in their microwave socket, but pretty small relative to economies of scale and to offering services to other miners. At some point, with all those debates going on with Régie de l'Énergie and everything, some other companies also involved in also increasing, or at least trying to increase their power, got into maybe some, in some instance they got into some big lease because they were expecting to get that energy, but they couldn't get it. So they had to close the company or stuff like that. So what we managed to do is find one of those companies and, save it from closing and to essentially to keep that grandfather clause that they have with Hydro-Quebec, which gave them that access to the energy. So this gave us that access to the energy. So we managed to expand our operations and get to 1 megawatt that way. So now 1 megawatt for people starting in the microwave bucket is pretty interesting. But again, we're kind of limited. We don't have, infinite funding, and hosting is very capital intensive.
Yep.
And we started to see a new kind of issue that was arising for our customers and ourselves, and it was some dashboards were starting to die, and we were starting to have some piles of them, and nobody was offering no repair services. So we start to ask ourselves, well, there must be a way to fix that. And I come from more like a cybersecurity, background, more network related background. So electronics is not something I'm familiar with, but I do have the hacker mindset. So I start to play with, and I start to, go to Russian forums and translate everything and try to understand what's going on under the hood. And so at some point, we start to have some repairs going on for ourselves, and we see all those, those boards for our customers and other people around us that are piling. So we start to, offer a bit around us, and the demand has just been crazy. So now we start hiring electronic technicians to start doing that repair services, and through that process we also get much better ourselves. We learn a lot about electronics. Now I know much more than that's one thing I really like about Bitcoin, is it's such multifaceted industry. And so yes, we're about in 2020, and repair is just going crazy. We've moved 3 times in the same year because we had to increase the space every time. And now you have the pandemic going on at the same time, and that was absolutely crazy. And there was the mining shortage also, the chips shortage. Yep. And China mining and yeah, so everything was crazy. And it led, so there was obviously a lot of eyes with all of that, and we had a very, very big team to fulfill all those needs. We had to come back a bit more to reality and to manage a bit more efficiently our operations. And we've learned that obviously through, I think bear markets are good obviously for the Bitcoin health and Bitcoin mining health, because we do have to cut on some expenses that could be possible during a bull market, but not necessarily during a bear. And it makes you, find all those inefficiencies you have in the business and be able to bring it back to a more balanced position. And so, yeah, that's essentially been the journey. Our goal and our name has been stating it since day one. We founded in 6 October 2016. We've always been about decentralizing the network. That's one of the reasons back then, when mining was centralized in China, we started here in Quebec. And that's why we're pushing today for home mining. We think it's the next frontier for Bitcoin mining.
Love that. No, and I think the progression of any great business is in many ways solving problems that either you yourselves or your customers are having. So yeah. And that's part of why, we're really pumped to be working with you guys, because you sort of do it all. There's a spectrum when it comes to Bitcoin mining. There's a lot of hosted, services out there, so you guys can offer that. But, as we'll get into, as you just kind of tipped us off, home mining, right? And, even repairs when you're doing that. So I think having that kind of one-stop shop is actually a pretty big deal. And I think that's pretty unique in the industry. But let's get into that, because I talk with a lot of folks who, and, even myself over the years, as I've learned more, I started with some of these assumptions around, home mining, it's just like not a thing, and then I slowly started discovering different resources. Econo Alchemist has some great guides on home mining. And so maybe demystify that a little bit for folks. Like, why do you think that is the next frontier? What is it you see from either a hardware or technology standpoint that's going to support the idea of more individuals being able to mine Bitcoin at home? And maybe talk about like some of the just operational challenges and considerations that folks should watch out for as they consider doing that.
Yeah. So Well, as I stated at the beginning, you have that issue here in North America. You don't necessarily have it as much in Europe, but we're limited with 110 or 120 volt outlets in our homes. So this is very limiting because most of the machines will run, over 1,500 watts, which is pretty much the limit. You can push it a bit more, but it's not safe. So let's say 1,500 watt is the limit. And so most machines are running over that. And some power supplies are limited to not run on 110 and 120. So with that limitation in mind, there are some alternatives. So for instance, if you use a S9 and you have a APW3, the APW3 is able to run up to 1,200 watts. But on top of that, if you want to run it as a silent heater in your home, anyways, you're going to want to decrease the amount of watts you're drawing, because you want to get the miner as silent as possible. So obviously, as it produces more hashes, it's getting more hot and it needs more air to be cooled down. Now, if you want to get this in your home, one thing to keep in mind is it's very noisy if you keep it in the stock settings. It almost resembles like an airplane landing. So you definitely don't want that in your home, especially not if you're in an apartment, but you can run it in all those scenarios, especially if you want to reuse as a space heater, and we definitely encourage that. You will essentially either nerf down the fans, downclock the machine, and there's more perks to downclocking the machine, and that's where we think home mining is the next frontier. Is you're going to get the best efficiency out of the machine. So for instance, let's say you use an Antminer S17 and you squeeze it to 1,000 watt. You're going to get the machines, if you keep them stuck, you're going to get the fans at about 6%. You're going to get 31 terahash, 1,000 watt. That's about 31 terahash, 31 watts per terahash. That's the efficiency of Antminer S19 Pro, essentially in your home. And it's silent, it's producing heat. And that's where it's also very efficient. And it's even more efficient than mining in hosting facilities as mine. You get better efficiency mining at home because you turn an expense, the heat, into into some revenue. So especially here in Canada, we have that advantage. And anywhere where you have cold climate, in hot climate, I think heat reuse will be mostly like heating your pool, stuff like that. But there's still some use cases there. So there's a lot of ways to turn an expense and turn that expense into revenue. And that's where I think plebs have a bigger potential than mining facilities.
Love that. No, and I think that's like a big sort of insight for folks, that if you are being smart about recycling or reusing, part of the output, which is heat, to, heat your home, et cetera, like the economics actually look even more favorable, which is a huge insight. I definitely agree. Like the voltage piece comes up a lot as people are just like, I don't know. So maybe, just in the interest, I'll kind of flash this page up too in some of the editing as an overlay, but because you have like a whole page dedicated to pleb mining on your store, which I love. So maybe are there any of these like products that you would highlight or recommend in particular? Someone listening to this is like, look, like I'm dying to kind of try mining Bitcoin at home. How might they get started? What are some good options? What would you suggest?
Yes, the pleb mining page, the pleb mining category is definitely my favorite. It's hard to make a call on the best product because they all answer different, crowds and needs. For instance, if I look into Europe, we seem to sell a lot of those Bitacs and mini bits, and I suspect it's a lot related to the energy, cost that's much higher. So anybody that wants to ideologically contribute to the Bitcoin network are not they're a bit priced out of doing that through mining in Europe. But if they do it through a 10 or 15 watt device with solo mining, then it becomes accessible and you can, do it. Obviously, it's ideological. I don't think you're going to get a revenue out of this. So that's one use case. You have some other products like, for instance, the space heaters we've just touched on. I think right now, obviously, we're getting into the winter, so I would highlight this product more, especially here in Quebec, Canada, because we do have about, already starting end of September, beginning of October, some people are starting to eat. So it's interesting. We have about 6 to 8 months where we can, turn that eat into Bitcoins. Obviously, cloud lines are also very interesting because you get to silence your miner output a lot. You can use them on 19 series. And
Mm,
speaking of 19 series, you also have a very nice product from Pivotal Pleb Tech, which is the let me recall the name there, the Loki board, which
mm,
allows you to essentially use all those people thinking that APW3 or APW9 are trash now because they're from some old gen. Well, Zach Broll just proved you wrong because he's turned all those power supply compatible to 19 series. So now one of the product that's not yet on our pleb mining category, but that is coming soon, is the one hashboard miner, which
mm.
we've dubbed the Antminer Slim. And the Antminer Slim is essentially going to be a case having one hashboard. We obviously, and we've run a poll about that. People seem to be wanting more like the 19 series and the 19 XP. So we'll be probably doing one hashboards with the 19 series boards. And you have one control board and one power supply. Power supply can be either APW3 or APW9. And what's interesting with that is we can just, go through all those old lots that people think are worthless, find the best deal, and pass that deal on to the plebs that are buying the slim version from us.
Very cool. Okay, excellent. So folks have options. I think that's the key. And you guys also do like, consultation, right? So I mean, if someone,
Correct.
listening has some ideas, but maybe they have some questions, I think you guys have just a ton of expertise over all these different things. So that's fantastic. I want to switch gears a little bit and just sort of get your take, maybe at a higher level on just the industry as a whole. You've got a lot of interesting things happening. Hash rate and difficulty have just been absolutely ripping over the last year, despite price largely being sideways for the most part. You've got, Stratum V2, and I did a video on that not too long ago, but I think it would be interesting to kind of hear from your perspective and some of what you were also saying about just open source mining more generally. So maybe talk a little bit about kind of where are we in the industry cycle? What do you see going forward as we approach the halving? What are miners sort of thinking about now? And what are some of the kind of dynamics and trends on the tech side that you're looking out for?
Yeah. So it's funny because difficulty, I always expected it to always go up. Like number go up, that's Bitcoin technology, right? So
Yes.
it's the same with proof of work. And that's what we want. It's exactly what we want. And I think there's a lot of explanations for that. Well, some of the explanations, so we've touched on the pleb miners, having some reuse with mining, but there's starting to be a lot of industrial scale reuse cases as well. So
Yep.
for instance, there's the methane capture, which is super interesting. I
Yep.
think the Bitcoin community should definitely support those projects going on because I mean, agree or disagree with the main narrative around climate. I think the way I see it, I'm a capitalist and I see market demand and I see market demand for carbon capture and carbon neutrality. So I think if there's market demand for that, it's a form of duty as industries to answer to that market demand.
Yep.
And so that's the perspective I adopt, about that. And so definitely, if we can go and nullify, I mean, we can nullify so efficiently we call it carbon equivalent because we're actually nullifying methane, but it's 20 times actually heavier than CO2. So it's super interesting, and we could actually, I think, really how it's going, at the scale it's going, I think by 2025, 2026, the industry as a whole could be entirely carbon neutral,
Wow.
and it makes economic sense, and that's what's very crazy because the main narrative is always telling like economy and making money and the environment doesn't go together, but
Yep.
Bitcoin mining is just disproving that, and so definitely it needs more visibility. It's definitely very
Yep.
good. So that's one thing where I see there's a lot of demand for Bitcoin mining, and that's it's a bit uncorrelated to how Bitcoin is performing as an asset. So obviously, yes, you do get that as a revenue, but it's not the important part of that kind of business model. Just as pleb miners using the heat, they're a bit shielded by the market fluctuation. So I think as we go, we're just going to see more and more of that decorrelation between price and hash rate, and number is just going to go up.
I love that.
That said, yeah, for Stratum V2 with all the pleb miners coming on, connecting, I think, and you know, there's been the drive chain debate
Yes.
going on lately.
Yep.
So I think it's super interesting to highlight Stratum V2 right now because it's a critical time to think about it. If you have those pools, like some people claimed that could collude all together and push a soft fork without, you know, their hashers' consent, I think, well, obviously we don't want that, and not only we don't want that, we just don't want to wait for it to happen before moving or whatever. Yes, there's always the possibility of hashers moving to another pool and all that stuff, but you just don't want to let them have that possibility. So let's just get that control back, bring it back to the hashers. Anyways, the initial original design was a bit, you know, more with a bit more decentralization in mind, obviously. So I think bringing that back and having more decentralization, more different kinds of block templates, and also obviously the main mission with censorship resistance is to have all those plebs and even those bitacks, just the possibility of one block, including all the censored transactions, if there comes to be a time where there is, you know, collusion, especially if we know about 50% of the pools are now KYC'd.
Yep.
I don't mean to say that KYC is necessarily a bad thing, but normally all the, you know, it all comes entrenched. And we know since 9/11, it's became a bit perverse how it's all, you know, acting together. So it has one mission in mind, but the results are something else.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And for folks who maybe are a little bit newer to Stratum V2, I'll give kind of my digest. You can tell
Yeah,
me if it's right or not. But essentially, it's this idea of, traditionally, I might be running a machine or X number of ASICs, whatever, and oftentimes I'm going to contribute my hash to a mining pool because the odds of me solo mining and winning a block, well, great, I get the whole block subsidy if that happens, the odds and probability are quite low. And so that kind of payout schedule, if you will, is going to look very, very spiky. And so what most people do is they prefer to direct their hash to a pool. And really all that's doing is it's sort of throwing my brute force, my sort of hashes up to this pool, but it's actually the pool that is creating the block, right? That is putting the transactions into the block. And what
correct.
Stratum V2 promises to do is enable that to be delegated to the component hashers. Did I get that kind of roughly right?
100% right.
Yeah,
Yes.
so that's huge. And as you said, it has a lot of implications for some of these proposals. I just did a video on drive chain, pros and cons and all this. So no, I love that. I don't know if there's anything around just the open source mining sort of in general that you want to kind of
Yeah,
comment on
well,
or how that might play out.
obviously we have the, you know, the BitAxe. So this is a project that's led by Scott 9000 on Twitter, if you go and look. And I think it's super important. I think the importance has been underplayed by some people, but in general, the community has been really, you know, supportive. Some of the points that has been brought about BitAxe is in its current form, it's not profitable, and that is absolutely correct. It's really an ideological project and
Mhm.
also a very great learning tool. I mean, you
Yeah,
get to learn all those electronics work together
yeah.
and they make hashes, and you know, you have a real ASIC chip from a real mining machine with like the real mining efficiency they have in those mining facilities. So I think it's really the way I've described it, it's a bit like the first transaction, the first Bitcoin transaction you do. For sure, it's the most unprofitable transaction you did, but
Yeah.
at the same time, it's the most profitable transaction because
Mhm.
that's the one that got you into Bitcoin.
Mhm.
So I think it's a bit of the same thing here. If it's the miner that gets you into mining and it gets you into understanding all of those, you know, layers of complexity, I think it's mission accomplished. And then from there, it's open source. So I mean, first of all, you can change whatever you don't like. So if you wanted to be more efficient or whatever, go ahead and make some changes. But that said, there are already a lot of changes going on. I've seen some of the projects that are coming. You have, for instance, you have a 6-chip BitX miner that's coming. So that's going to be about 3 terahash. One thing that I'm very excited about and we want to work on here at Decentral is to have a, you know, a miner included in a full node. So you get the real full node, with the mining functionality also included.
Very
And
cool.
the cherry on top would be to run your own local instance of, for instance, CK pool, but locally. So you get to find a block, for instance. You even get to embed your own message, and you get to do the whole thing by yourself, and you could test it on testnet and everything. So it's, again, for education, it's super interesting. Aside of that, you also have some solar reuse projects. So uh, there's a lot of use with clipped energy, they call it. So that clipped solar energy is like energy that's not worth to go and collect. But if you can just keep it, for instance, in a direct current, and just collect that direct current and mine directly from it,
Mm,
so get that, that overflow, let's say,
yep.
you could just convert it into ashes. So there might be some ways, to create specific device for them. Because if you use, for instance, a S9, S17, S19, they're designed to be on 24/7, those machines.
Yep.
But if you design specifically a miner for, redundancy, there's all kinds of use cases we're probably not even thinking about right now that become possible. I've seen, for instance, there's a project where we could retrofit S9 hash boards with, the latest chips. So, for instance, imagine S19 XP chips, but on S9 compatible boards.
Mm,
So let's say you have a S9 that has one hash board that died. Well,
hmm.
you don't unplug the S9, you just remove that burnt hash board or whatever and replace it by one that's with the latest efficiency. So you get 21 watts per terahash inside your S9. I've seen also PCI Express, designs. So imagine now having some ASIC chips, maybe the equivalent of hashboard, maybe the equivalent of one S19 hashboard, S19 XP hashboard that you plug as a PCI card inside your computer, and boom, you start mining.
Ooh,
So there's all sorts of use cases, and they're all happening right now as we speak.
wow.
And there's a lot of people working on that. I definitely invite your viewers to go and learn about Open Source Miners United. They're a big group, mainly organized on Discord, and I mean, I call them the mining hackers.
Love that. Love that. The power of open source. We've seen it happen with wallets. We've seen it happen with other facets of Bitcoin technology, node software, different things like that. But super, super exciting to see what has historically been a little more closed sort of door, right? These are important proprietary things. So it's very, very cool to see that coming out into the open. I want to switch gears one last time. Obviously, we're super pumped to be partnering with you guys at Joltz. Talk a little bit about what Bitcoin Rewards does for your business, and maybe tell folks a little bit about the offer that you're currently running.
Yeah, well, obviously, I think mining business is the business that makes the most sense to partner with Jolts, and the reason is simple. The goal of mining is to collect sats, and so when we're enabling sats back, we're giving you a cheat code essentially, so you
Yes.
can get some sats back straightforward, straight away. You don't have to wait and plug the machine. You get them right away. So that's the goal for us with sats back: is you use your credit card, you turn that nasty fiat into sats right away. So the discounts we have right now are going from 3% to 10%. We do want to put some badges to bring some clarity on which products have which exactly sets back. Right now, it's a bit of a roulette. So you come on the shop and you find out. So there's that, and so yeah, it definitely makes a lot of sense for us to. I think we're the industry that makes the most sense because the goal is clear: is getting sats.
Absolutely. Yeah. What better deal? You're going in, you're getting hardware that is going to give you a future stream of sats. You get some immediately. So no, we're pumped, and it's pretty awesome. 3 to 10% back, like that's pretty significant. This has been great, Jonathan. You've shared a lot of insight. Where should folks go to get their hands on some of these great products, or reach out to you guys for consulting expertise, or any of your services for that matter?
Yeah, so we try to keep the website the most comprehensive as possible. You can go d-central.tech, TCH. You can go to our Twitter handle, Decentral Tech all together. My own handle, CryptechX. We have our own Discord channel as well. our own YouTube channel as well. So we try to, be out there in the community. Do reach out. I think the best way to, to get good support, though, if you want to inquire about a certain service or product, is definitely to write an email or to open a ticket through our support system. So support@decentral.tech. This way, we have a system in place and we make sure everything is answered within the 24 hours. Nothing is missed. Nothing goes between two chair. So yeah, that's essentially it.
Fantastic. Jonathan, I was pumped to meet you guys up in Toronto, watching you guys on the soldering boards and all this stuff. You guys are some of the very best in the business, so we could not be more pumped to be partnering with you. And I think, again, it's just this one-stop shop for all things mining, particularly, leaning into this kind of pleb mining, which I very much hope becomes a big next movement. So I think a lot of folks listening can very much contribute to that in a way that earns them more sats. So Jonathan, thank you once again for coming on the channel. It's been
Thanks for having
great.
me.
We'll do it again soon.